at a big academy like mine, we are watching kids 6 and 7 years old. That's when we start our recruitment. When I had two of my boys at academies, we sat down and worked out how much time in a week they had with the ball at their feet. If someone is a right-footed centre back, I say, oh, okay, we've got quite a few of them. You tell me it's a left-footed centre back. Oh, okay, now I'm interested. What they like. This is before we know what they're like, because there is a shortage in most academies of left-footed players.
Welcome to another edition of the Inside Scoop. My name is Neil Crawford. I'm your host and also the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. We're heading into the new year, and I have a special guest that I am so excited to introduce you to. He is a lead academy scout. He's publishing a book. He does video analysis, and he has his own company doing that. And Chris, don't get me wrong, but you have at least 30 years of scouting experience and experience in football academies in the UK. And in addition to that, did I hear 5 sons?
Yeah.
5 sons.
And one
and one daughter, and 3 of who have been in professional academies at some point. So you also bring a parent's perspective of trying to understand the entire process. I am so excited to have you on the show because there's so much information that you have that's going to be so valuable to our parents. And I'm looking forward to just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So Chris Robinson, introduce yourself, state your name, state your claim, what you got going on, and then we're going to jump into the show.
Okay, so firstly, Neil, thanks for inviting me on the show. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to connecting up with your followers as well and for our conversation. So I've been in the professional game in England for over 30 years. I coached at clubs like Portsmouth and Manchester City. I managed full-time here in England. And then I got into recruitment, 12 years at Chelsea FC Academy, probably the best academy in the world. And then I left there in November 23. We launched the business, my wife and I, the scouting game that you've mentioned, doing independent player assessments all around the world by video. And then I joined Southampton as head of academy recruitment in February of 24. So very busy. But I mean, everything I'm doing is in football, which I love. And so it's a joy to be working full time with these different aspects of the game. But it's all about looking at players, watching games, assessing players, and finding talent.
Yeah. So before we jump into the interview, it's kind of interesting how I found you and discovered you. So remember, I said I saw one of your YouTube interviews, and it was a full-length interview, very long, and I don't typically get a chance to watch an entire interview like that, but it was so captivating. And the way you guys answered all the questions, I was like, this is amazing. So I added it to my newsletter, and I shared the interview with some of my close soccer friends. And one of them is a parent who has a teenage son. And he watched the interview, and he must have reached out to you guys some kind of way. I had completely forgot. Months later, he reaches back out to me and says, Neil, these guys have created this wonderful analysis of my son's game. They did all the video analysis. They have this team, and they've given him a 15-page detailed report that he can take away, get some honest feedback, and improve aspects of his game. And he was so impressed with the work. He said, hey, Neil, this is someone you may want to interview so that more parents find out about it. And once he told me who you were, I was like, oh, I've already added his YouTube interview to my newsletter. And people actually respond to me, thanking me for sharing that YouTube video. So thank you for what you do. Free content, free information is often underrated. Free information coming from someone with 30 years of experience who has worked at the top academies is extremely valuable to parents, whether you like it or not. and you probably don't get enough thanks. So you probably get people watch 50 minutes and they tell you the one, and they try to point out the one mistake you have instead of saying thank you. So I just wanted to start off the interview giving you your flowers. Okay.
Thank you.
So now I like to go on a oral history of what football was like when you started. So how did you actually get into scouting, and what was scouting like? And I'm going to tell you your age. You were scouting before we had computers, personal computers. So what was scouting like back then?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question. It's changing. It's a changing field. It's still changing, but it has changed a massive amount when you go back, back when I was playing in non-league in the UK and then coaching professionally and so on, we didn't have mobile phones, let alone we didn't have computers, So everything was different. Finding out about games, sharing information about players. Looking back, I don't know how we did it. I can't imagine how we could have exchanged information now, because like most people, certainly most people in football, but in lots of walks of life, as I'm sure your viewers will relate to, we live on our phones. My wife complains reasonably that my phone never stops. It's WhatsApp and it's emails and everything. But before that, I guess it was just normal phone calls and getting out and seeing people, a slower pace, and it was a harder job to do then. But we didn't have the structures that we have now. There wasn't the same academy system. When I was a kid, you played for your school, okay? There were no clubs, no local clubs when you were a kid, 13, 14, 15. You played for your school. Maybe you played for your district, your immediate area, representative football. And that's where you got picked up by scouts. And you got picked up maybe when you're 14, 15, you could begin to be associated with a club. And then you became what was called an apprentice professional. But there was no academy structure like now. Now in England, at a big academy like mine, we are watching kids 6 and 7 years old. That's when we start our recruitment. Well, there was none of that back then. So the whole youth development field in England has boomed over the last 30 years, particularly, I would say, over the last 15 years since we had the full development of the academy system. So it's changed and it's boomed, and it's a big industry now. And that's partly because of all the money that's come into English football with TV. That's where the money comes from, after all, through Sky and what have you. And that has just opened the game up, and the development of talent has become even more important because that talent is so prized and so costs so much money, it's been a revolution in that sense. And I've ridden along on that wave, sometimes submerged, but sometimes getting back to the top as football has changed and gone forward.
So let's talk about some details as it relates to and I'm going to use a term, the professionalization of the academy system in response to the emergence of all the TV revenue and the explosion of the EPL to be like a global league.
Yeah.
Was that like certain clubs were vanguards and then they were winning and people jumped on the boat, or was it a FA driven thing, bottom down, top up, or how did that work? How did it manifest itself in daily life?
Well, the English FA were failing and struggling to develop players. And then TV money came along at the end of the 90s, and suddenly there was a lot more money in football. The Premier League was set up and developed and launched, and it took football in the UK, England particularly, to a different level. As you say, Neil, you're quite right. It's an international league that happens to be based in England. It's not an English league, really. But the money was there. And so it became clear that to service this international league, particularly, and the growing game, we needed to have a revolution and much better youth development. So it's the Premier League that took hold of it. The Premier League run the academy system in England, not the FA. It's the Premier League that drive it, that have been behind it and who manage it and who regiment it and so on. It's the Premier League. So it's a Premier League driven enterprise altogether. And that has changed. They brought out the the Elite Player Performance Plan, it was called, EPPP, we call it in the game. And that set out standards of academies, what staff you needed in order to be a top academy, different grades of academies. The whole thing began to be structured and developed much more than what it used to be before. And so that changes really kicked in 2007, 2008, and that's where it's really kicked on from then over the last, almost 20 years now. We've seen this big change. And it has worked. It has driven up standards of our players. No doubt about that. But it does mean, as you say, kids of 6, 7, and 8 are getting attracted into professional structures. Youngest you can sign them is under 9. They're still very young. They're 8 years old. And they think they've made it. And their parents think they've made it at 8. And it's selection because it's elite sport. And where there is selection, there's disappointment. And so you have to then deal with all of that comes with it. The raising of the standards, the raising of everybody's vision has also meant that people get selected and they get rejected along the line. And that's a very difficult issue. So it's boomed, but not without cost.
So in terms of the culture of football, the joy of football, what impact do you think the emergence and the professionalization of the academy system, now you have the private training and all that kind of stuff, what impact do you think that's had on the national culture of football in England compared to when you were growing up?
When I had 2 of my boys at academies, we sat down and worked out how much time in a week they had with the ball at their feet. They were in academies. And so we worked out that at their age, not in any academies, there was no academies. I used to go to school early to play football for an hour before school started. I would stay behind after school to play football. I would play football every break, okay, from age of 7, 8 upwards, right until I was 16. So there was no clubs, rather, just school football once or twice a week. That was it. There was no coaching at all. Yeah, compared to my boys who were in professional academies and getting professional coaching, I had way more contact time with the ball than they did. They had other things they were doing as well. They got loads more coaching than I ever did at those ages, but they had less time just playing with the ball. As a kid in my school in the middle of London, you couldn't use full-size footballs. So we played with tennis balls, which, of course, now you look back as a coach and say, wow, what a fantastic development. Because you have to be able to control a tennis ball because we weren't allowed to play with big footballs. I never played on grass till I was 12 years old. So you had to play on tarmac, and in the streets. So it was different. Not saying it's better, but it produced a different sort of culture, as you say. Now there is this belief that everything has to be organized and there has to be structured and there's coaching and that's good in some ways if your level of coaching can meet that demand, which we're struggling to do in the UK at the moment. So it has changed massively. The culture has changed. It has been professionalized. That has not been without its problems or without its costs in human terms of disappointment and so on. So you have all that to deal with. But the end product, if we just look at the ends rather than the means, in England, our national teams have been more successful on the international stage at 17, 19 and 21 than they ever were before. So in that sense, it's working. We're producing better players overall. It's a matter of opinion whether it's all worth the costs of that from human terms.
Yeah. And so this is something that we're struggling with here in the States, and I'll get your opinion on this. So soccer is not our number one sport. And we have a culture that's leaning more to a term that I just kind of made up. I'm calling it activity parenting. You kind of alluded to it. Everything everything your child does needs to be sort of structured with a bit of fun and development. It's not good enough anymore to just go and play on the jungle gym. Now you got to go to Taekwondo. It's not good enough to just hang out and do ride your bike and fall off a zillion times. Now you got to get bike lessons. It's not good enough just to go to the park and play soccer. And some kids are good, some kids are not, blah, blah, blah. Now you have to be in a club. And the struggle that we're having is because American culture, and this is my opinion, values that degree of organization, that degree of structure, that degree of qualified coaches in a way that I don't feel like a lot of other countries do at the grassroots level. It artificially inflates the price of participation and then potentially excludes kids out. So that's a cryptic way of saying it's almost like we're saying, you know what, the public school is not good enough. We're all going to go to private school. And then we complain about the cost of school, not realizing that the soccer that we are playing in the club system, where you get 3 days of practice, well manicured fields, a coach who is paid, a coach who has a license, organized leagues, nice uniforms, team snap, or all these other certain things, you know, in the list. And then they also, these big clubs have directors and overhead, and the list goes on and on and on. These are not academies. These are our equivalent of club soccer. So this is anybody can play if they can pay. It's just really driving up our costs in an artificial way, instead of people necessarily just saying, you know what, it's grassroots. Mom and dad are going to coach. We're going to support them and help them. But the real driver of development, especially at those younger ages, is foot on the ball and experiencing the game. That's where we're struggling with in America.
To some extent, in the UK, we're having similar problems, but there's massive cultural difference. And the first thing, as you started off by saying, Neil, that soccer in USA isn't the number one sport. Well, when I was a kid growing up in London, football was our religion. It was everything to us. We played other sports as well, cricket, which is totally confusing to all you guys, tennis, maybe, you know, but football was it, you know, that was our religion. That's what we lived for. And that was in our blood. You know, my dad played, my granddad played. They supported different teams to me, and kids at school, who you supported meant what tribe you were with, you know. Football was massive in our culture, working class culture. So if being successful at football required parents who could pay, I would not be working in football today, because my parents couldn't have afforded that. I was homeless as a kid when I was younger in London, but I had a great family. But you didn't need to have money in that sense. Now, today we have lots of clubs organised with the uniforms, as you say, and the leagues and so on, and there is cost to that. Getting access to the training facilities and the playing facilities, there's a cost to that, and that drives up costs here. But there is still a lot of provision being put on for kids who don't have that money. So when I was at Chelsea, give you a little example. At Chelsea, we used to go and set up what we call talent ID events in a local park, you know, and kids could just come along from schools at 6, 7 years old. And we had one kid turn up one day, and he didn't even have any football boots or any football kit. He just turned up in like jeans, you know, and a t-shirt. His family didn't have enough money to get him everything. That kid, Jezra Raksaki, playing in the Premier League now. Okay.
Wow.
So his family didn't provide him with anything. They couldn't do. And he's playing in the Premier League now. And his brother is playing in the Premier League as well. Just made his debut for Chelsea recently. So it is still possible. It's still basically a working class sport, a mass sport in England. And that brings with it lots of opportunity to play different places. But the issues of cost are beginning to become more and more apparent as there's less and less facility. Parents don't want their kids just playing on the street. Are they safe? You know, and so on. So it's beginning to shift. But the strength of football in England is because of its working class nature and how it is part of life for so many people in England.
Yeah, so let's be clear about this though. So in England now, to the best that you can remember, and you can talk about your kids as well. So if you want your kids to play soccer, okay, and they're not scouted for an academy, but you fashion yourself that if I can get them in the right environment and get them some decent coaching, they may have an opportunity. What options are available for you as a parent in England right now, to the best that you know?
So I live in West Sussex, in the south of England, about 60 miles south of London on the coast. If I was to go out the weekend in my local park, there'll be local teams playing, of all ages, 9, 8, or probably 7 or 8 years upwards, 16, And any of those local clubs, they probably train once, maybe twice a week. They probably have parents who are the coaches, as you mentioned. They have to be registered from a safeguarding point of view. And many of them would have done maybe their level 1 coaching. Okay, but mostly are their parents. So the coaching level varies. And that would cost, a typical cost would be something like probably $500 a year. Okay, that will be fairly normal. Now, there's a lot of people in England who can't afford $500 a year for a leisure activity. So there is still routes into football and still clubs that will be there, and certainly in the poorer areas in the big cities, where you don't have to pay as much as that. They might get some sponsorship to help their costs, or they find other ways. They might get access to cheaper training facilities and so on. And so it's still broadly open access. But typically that will be the sort of cost. Now you can go on from that. If kids are really keen and parents have the money, they might be playing for 2 games. They might be playing for one team on a Saturday, another on a Sunday. So you've got double the cost, but double the training, double the coaching during the week. You might have parents who can afford one-to-one coaches, and do some extra work. There's thousands of one-to-one coaches in England, and about 4 or 5% of them are any good.
Okay? I was going to ask you, don't go on a tangent, but did they have one-to-one coaching when you were coming up?
No, other than my dad. No, not at all. We had no coaching. I was never coached until I got to 18. So, I had no coaching.
So let's unpack this for a second. All right, that's the Grassroots local club. Now, what standard would they play in? And are you familiar with any U.S. soccer clubs in general?
Through our assessments, we've done quite a few assessments of players in USA.
So how would, to the best you can think of, like a typical Grassroots club team compare to your average club American team?
So let's take London, maybe an extreme example, really, city of whatever it is, 8-9 million people, so a huge city. 16 professional football clubs, I don't know how many semi-pro clubs, football in every corner, football in every park. So the first thing to say is the major difference is there will be a great range of abilities playing, for sure, but there is more variety. And if your kid is good and you want them to step up, you won't have to go far to find a club that's at the next level up. So you have a lot of opportunity, a lot of variety, and football pretty much all abilities. So if you and I walk down my local park this weekend, we might see a fairly low standard game. But on the next pitch, at the same age, there could be a really top standard game. So in that sense, one of the things I've noticed is there's more variety. There is more scope for players. A lot of my conversations with parents in USA is where they are identifying. We do an assessment and I say, look, your kid is probably the best player in the team. Now, straight away, if you want your kid to develop, if your kid is the best player in the team, that should be an alarm bell. Because you don't want your kid to be the best player in the team. You want them to be challenged and being developed. So they need the next step. And the parents might say to me, yeah, that's great. But the next club at the next levels, 2 hours, 3 hours drive away. You know what I mean? So there's not those options that there are in England, which is the strength of our game, again, because of how pervasive it is and how it's everywhere. It gives you all those levels. And I understand that you don't have that in the USA. And that's the major difference there's two differences, I think, between the UK football kids development and that in USA. One is ours is a mass working class sport still at its heart. And secondly, part of that is you have so much more game standard to pick from, different games of standards. And so the kids get better variety of game experience. When I watch USA kids, I'm generalizing here, but technically they can be okay. Physically, they're all right, quite athletic. But the game experience, understanding of the game is where there's most likely to be the sort of gap between similar age players in the UK.
So to add some nuance to that, in the US, even if you live in a city, there's typically a linear relationship, but not linear, sorry, a positive correlation between the level and the cost. The better the level, the more the cost. So let's just use the $500 example. If you don't make an academy, but you want to get a better training environment, and you talked about you can get more contact hours by playing for 2 clubs. But what if you want to play for a slightly better grassroots club? Is that going to cost materially more, or is it just going to be a better parent who's more organized and has more experience coaching?
Yeah, it needn't necessarily be more expensive to be at the higher standards. Clubs are getting more sophisticated now. And so a lot of them will have video coverage of games, which parents can access. And a lot of them have better standards of coaching. But it needn't be more experienced to play at the next level up. It needn't more expensive. And I have to remember that the academy system itself is totally free.
Yes.
You get in a kid at 9, once you get in the system, then it's free. And that's really important in those early stages.
So before we get on to the scouting, let me just be really clear about this. In the States, let's control for the quality of the coaching. Let's assume that the club does exactly what they say they're going to do. It's very possible in most cases, any city, to get the same contact hours, same type of facilities, even play against the pro academies and not be at a pro academy standard, as long as you got to be good, but not at a pro academy standard, as long as your parents can afford it, pay to play. And culturally, our parents, the vast swath of them that actually participate in youth sports, don't have a problem doing that. When I lived in the UK, and I lived a long time in the UK, and I lived in the UK about 15 years ago. I moved about 15 years ago, to give you some context. So 10 years before that, I remember, and I tell this story often, going back to visit my wife's family, because her family is there, and visiting my tenants who were my friends, because I used to have a flat there. And I was trying to explain this to them because they knew I was into football. Oh, you're into football. And I was trying to explain how this worked. In their eyes, they did not understand it. They could not conceive of paying that kind of money for a child to have that type of training and exposure if the scouts hadn't already told you, this is a child we want. I understand that's probably changing, though. And parents are becoming more and more intentional in the UK about developing their player, as opposed to maybe just waiting on the scout. But I want to get your opinion on that. So I want to be clear. In our culture, 9 years old, we're going to try to get you the best training possible, paid coach, best leagues, best everything, because we culturally look at it like, if we can get you the right environment, you may develop into a great player. I felt like my friends and the overall culture, especially the immigrant population, we haven't even talked about that, because they were prioritizing education mainly. looked at it like if you're that good, they will find you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that is still largely true here. The scouting network is very extensive. The higher level you play, the better chance you've got of being scouted, though. That's the first thing. Because if my team of scouts are going out this weekend for local football, you generally will start at the higher levels of football, the best games that you can get to watch, because you're going to get generally more better players. So you will look at the higher standards. So to increase your chances of getting selected for an academy, it is better to be playing at the better standards, just from stats point of view. But as I said, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be more expensive. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is there is so much football here. Let me just tell you a story, Neil. When I was a kid, and I went with my dad, on Sunday mornings, we used to go out and we would go and watch football. On Saturdays, we would have watched professional football. Sunday mornings, if in the middle of London, we used to go to a place called Hackney Marshes. Okay, now Hackney Marshes is a big playing fields area. And you can stand in the middle of that. Let's say this was the mid-60s. And there will be over 100 football games going on at the same place. So I was a kid, age 10, 12, whatever. Stand in the middle. I used to think it was heaven. I used to say to my dad, this is what heaven must be like, as far as you could see was football going on. Adults football, this was on a Sunday, which has changed a lot now. That has reduced a lot. But it was fantastic. As a kid, I loved it, And now still, we could go out a weekend, Neil, and we could see loads of local football. So you have this variety and this scope here, which is the strength of our grassroots game. And you can go up the levels as a kid. It needn't necessarily cost you more. And that gives you fantastic opportunity.
But it's going up the levels how you would define the pyramid. Does the pyramid define the levels at the grassroots youth level as well?
Yeah.
So then if I move to London and I fashion my son to be pretty good, and ultimately I want him to have an opportunity to be scouted, I would come to you and say, Chris, what grassroots club do you recommend I try out for? And then if the standard is high, then he will literally either make the team or not make the team. Is that how it works?
Absolutely.
And then that higher standard grassroots club, will they have a paid coach?
Probably not. There are more and more paid coaches coming in, and it's a very good development in many ways. But still, most of the coaches at the top level of grassroots football, for kids football, are going to be parents.
So is this I say this in tongue in cheek when I try to compare the US to the UK. Is this a fair statement? The majority of kids playing football in the UK, and again, we're doing the time tamping. You can tell me if this statement, we know this statement, what I'm about to say was true at some point, but is it still true? Would never have seen a paid coach, let alone play under one. Is that a true statement?
It's a good question. Yes, I think it is still so, but it's less and less clear now because more and more kids might go to a soccer school, which is relatively low cost, or a soccer scheme, which clubs run in the community, which might be totally free. And so they might be getting paid coaches in other venues, in other ways. It is growing more. Generally, though, that would probably be true still.
I'm going to close with this, and then we're going to go on to the final questions from the Facebook group. My former tenants who are my friends, you know how much she paid for her son's soccer? And she was so excited to tell me. She said, "Oh, we have to pay £5 for the class." And she said, "But the school is so lovely. If you can't afford that, you can get a discount."
Yeah.
Hey, so does that sound familiar?
Absolutely. And that is the strength of our game.
Yes. Okay. So now we're going to go to the speed round and we're going to wrap this up. So give me the blocking and tackling of how scouting works in the UK. Bird's eye view down to the detail.
Every one of the top players you see in the Premier League from whichever country they've come from, has been scouted by someone at some time, at some age. How do we do it in the UK? In my team, for my club, we have 40 or 50 scouts who are out in our region, because you are restricted by the Premier League where you can recruit people from geographically. Have to be within a certain travel distance, depending on age. And they'll be out watching grassroots football every week. So the better leagues, you're going to get 2 or 3 scouts, maybe 2 or 3 clubs, all watching the better players. It's very, very competitive. And this is from age 6 upwards. This happens, okay? 6 right through to 18, 21s even. And then they are identifying talent, and they might bring them into some sort of development center or assessment center, and then ultimately, maybe on a formal trial with the academy, which is an 8 weeks trial, and that's how players get selected. So if you look behind me, on that wall, there's a shirt from Reece James that Reece James was kind enough to sign and give to me when I left Chelsea. Now, Reece was scouted when he was 7 years old by a great scout called Ray Rembridge at Chelsea. And Reece came in at 7 years old to a development centre, which was free in southwest London. He was a striker then, actually, when he came in. And he did very well. And Chelsea liked him. And they kept him coming into their development centres, all free. Then they signed him at under 9 into the academy. And he went on from there and onwards and upwards, is now captain of Chelsea. So that's a very typical route. Very young, the best players, all the best players, Marcus Rashford, Jude Bellingham, any player that you name, Harry Kane, they were all picked up when they're 7, 8 years of age. That's the most common age of the best players. You can still get in later on.
Oh, okay. But let me cut you off because I know your time is going to be, I'm trying to do the speed round now.
Yeah, sorry.
In terms of the blocking and tackling, does the club call you, the grassroots club call you and say, hey, I got a kid you need to look at? Or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, a bit of both. The key to scouting is, grassroots scouting, as we call it, is network. You need to have all your contacts. You need to be well known.
Now, does a scout, is it a different skill set to scout a 6 and 7 year old, using that as an example, versus a 14 or 15 year old who's close to the end?
Absolutely. 6 or 7, you're looking at technical ability and physical literacy. Do they move well? By the time they get to 14 or 15, you still want technique and physical ability, but now you're beginning to say, do they understand the game? Do they make good decisions? Are they aware of other people? In other words, tactical awareness. And you're also looking at, do they work hard? Do they have character? Do they have desire? Do they have a winning mentality? So the psychological side comes in more and more as you get older.
Do you guys have free agent scouts who get paid on commission if someone gets signed?
No.
Is that a thing?
No.
I heard on a YouTube channel someone said I used to scout part-time and I got paid if they got signed. That's not really a thing?
No, clubs might engage a scout and say, in the past, I think this is more common, yeah, if you bring us a player and we'll sign them, then we'll pay you. But they probably only work for one club. Now, what you do get is if you get someone who's got a really good local club, a really top club or a top soccer school, they might have relationships with clubs. But it's actually illegal to pay them for finding you a player unless they're registered with you as a scout.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. And that's the kind of information you're going to be putting in your book, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Because one of the issues that we have, and we're not going to have time, we got to do a separate interview. One of the issues we have in the States is the scout that's recruiting you to come abroad to Europe. There are some sincere and legitimate actors who get you a trial. Yes, you have to pay, but they will bring you to their academy or whatever, work with you, and then you will have an opportunity to be seen. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of false hope and promises made to as well. So that's something I didn't know that. So that would be a good question to ask someone if they're saying they're representing this academy. Are you registered as a scout? That would be a good question to ask.
Absolutely. And they should have, all of them, a pass like this. This is my one from Southampton that I'll hold up there. Photo ID.
But y'all need to modernize that, man. I can get that made in 2 seconds.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We are just
old school
to electronic ones. But the point is, there should be photo ID. And then,
Photo ID.
yeah, and so at least you should have that. But yeah, unfortunately, people do get misled and they do get missold.
Okay. So now we're going back to one of my son's favorite my boy's video games, FIFA.
Yeah.
You see a kid, and you see the stories like the FIFA does all those stories. I can't remember anymore. Do y'all go get a parent to call your card immediately? Do you talk to the coach? Is there some rules about that?
Yeah. If I'm watching a game out on the parks, as we say, or local football, I must approach the club first, not the parent. So I must speak to the manager or the head coach and say, hey, who's your number 10? And they say, oh, well, that's Neil. And I say, oh, I liked him. Has he been in anywhere else? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, his parents here. Can I talk to the parents? Yeah, that's Neil's, mum and dad over there. Okay, I'll go and speak to them. You have to go through the club. They're the rules of engagement.
Do you guys, once you get to know a player, do you consider, let's say you have a parent like me working with the kid every day, training them, blah, 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 and the kid is technical. And then you have another kid who parent doesn't do any of that, and the kid is pretty technical. Do y'all say to yourself, wow, if he's at this standard and he doesn't have all this support, if we get him into our system, the upside is even greater? Do y'all say stuff like that?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about is what's the training age of a player. So you can have their calendar age, obviously, when their birthday is. You can have whether they're early maturers or late maturers. You can have whether they're emotionally, developed or not. But you also have their training age. So if someone comes to us at 14 and they've never been in another academy and they've had relatively little coaching, we say they have a zero rate training age. And so that's something we need to know, because we think, oh, okay, as long as this kid can show us that they learn well, that they're good at taking on information, we know they're going to have a long way to go, but we can reasonably expect that there's plenty of room, what we say is a high ceiling for improvement.
All right. So now we're just going to go through the ones from the Facebook group.
Yeah.
When you attend a match, are you typically scouting specific players? And you can pick the age, Chris, or looking at specific positions or assessing the broader talent pool?
It depends. Firstly, the general scouts will be out what we call scanning. They're out watching teams. They're watching lots of matches, and they're sort of doing an initial scan of players to find talent. Someone like me, who's head of a department, when I'm going to a game, I'm usually being sent in or suggested that I go in because there's a player that our whole process has identified is a target. So it's like there's a filter system, if you like. And by the time I'm going as the head of recruitment, I'm going to watch someone. It's to decide whether we sign him or not. I've probably already watched him on video, and so now I'm going to see them live, and that's a sort of a final decision. So my own scouting now for my club tends to be more targeted at individual players. But of course, as a scout, when you're out there on the ground, then you do more scanning, more general stuff. But I always look at every player.
Yeah, because you never know. A lot of times there's a lot of situations where there's a famous basketball player here in the States. His name is John Morant. He got discovered because there's another famous basketball player that was playing, and he was on another court. No one thought about it. He's a relatively small guy. And the story is everybody was told, the recruiters, you need to go over there. This dude is crazy. You know what you're getting with the one you came to see, but you haven't seen this one. So, and then the rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, do the parents know that a scout is there? Do you wear anything? Like, are you just trying to be discreet, or they just know because you're not a parent?
In a grassroots scouting, as our local scouting, I encourage all of our scouts to wear club kit. So we provide them all with club kit. So coats, tracksuits, whatever, the whole thing. And the reason for that is we want them to be identifiable from a safeguarding point of view. They're clearly there from our club. They represent our club. We want them to look the part. We want them to look professional. But also it shows everybody that's there that our club is interested in that football, in that park on that morning. It's a PR thing as well. So there's a professional reason and a PR thing. If I'm going to watch players who are playing for other clubs, other academies, then I would tend not to wear club stuff. I would go more incognito.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, so do people change when they see you, or is it so standard they know?
Yeah. So we have summer tournaments here, which are great from a scouting point of view because you watch loads of football. And when I, as a scout, go to a summer tournament, I'll go and see the organisers, say, "Hey, I'm here." Show them my pass, and so they know I'm legitimate. And before I've gone 50 meters, word has got round. Hey, there's a scout from whoever, Chelsea or Southampton, as it is now, because they've got the kit on as well usually, and so people know. So parents will come up to you and say, "Hey, you got to see my kid."
They would literally do that.
Oh, yeah.
Time out.
Yeah.
Talk about not being self-aware, even though that actually, you could tell me it might influence you. But, God, that's chutzpah. They actually do that?
Oh, yeah. And the kids will come up and say, "Hey, you got to come and watch me. I'm playing at 11 o'clock over there, And so that's fun. That's okay. I mean, after all, every day I get videos sent in. We all do it, all the clubs from parents saying, "This is my kid. Come and scout them." So it's just the same, but it's live. Yeah. A lot of parents are not shy about it. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, and I'm a small business owner, and so my buddy always give me a hard time because I don't sell good, and he's like, "Bro, you gotta be selling." So I guess maybe so, but I don't know. That seems a bit abrasive, but do it. Use everything in your toolbox. Okay, speed round. Now we talked about this, but I really want to try to translate it to the soccer pyramid. What levels do you guys scout at? And if you're at a low level grassroots team, is it not a chance? So in the soccer pyramid, how does that work for the youth level?
It's harder to get noticed if you play really low level. You might be a great player, playing with your mates, your friends, but you've got real talent. But the fact it's harder because if you're a scout and you're thinking, right, I'm going to go out Saturday morning, where should I go and watch a game? You'll know your local leagues and you'll know who the best teams are, the best clubs. You're naturally going to start with them, because it's just statistics will tell you've got a better chance of finding better players. Not always, but overall. So, of course, if you're playing for the better clubs, you do have a better chance of getting watched.
But is it like League One, League Two, League Three, then Academy? Is it similar to that?
Yeah, in a local area, in my area where I live around here, take that as an example. I know our local league will have various divisions at each age. They might have the best leagues here, 5 or 6 different divisions at any age. A lot of football again. So it's fairly easy to identify who the top teams are.
And then is there promotion relegation at the youth level? Okay, so you're going to know that. All right.
It's competitive. Absolutely.
So how often are you guys scouting per year?
Every scout that we have will watch 4 or 5 games a week, minimum. A week.
Oh, that's a lot.
I watch 8 or 9 games a week on video and live.
I'm going to do a calculator and see how many minutes of football you probably watched in your life.
Oh,
that's a lot.
It is. Yeah. My wife's
about youth kids too.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, all ages. Because I'm responsible in my club from age 6 to age 21. So a massive range of kids. My wife says, how come you can remember every football you've ever seen, but you can't remember what day the garbage bins go out, And it's true. It's a matter of, if you like it enough, you focus.
So all year round, basically, as long as the grassroots season is going, you guys are watching. Now, do you have coaches that you quote unquote trust more than others? Like if they call you and say, "I got somebody"?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Are there grassroots clubs that are really explicit about come to us? We're going to try to get you signed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that normal, frowned upon, part of the deal, or what?
It's the competitive market that we're in. If you're an ambitious parent, ambitious for your kid, and that club there, they have got a good track record of getting kids into professional clubs, then you're going to be attracted to it. So we know that clubs, if we sign a player from a local club, we expect that club will advertise it on their social media or whatever. Hey, congratulations to Neil, just got signed by Southampton or whatever, because that is all advertising for them and it helps them.
Yeah, because the first podcast I did was a guy, he's still I'm gonna tell you his story. He's Remy Dejon, I think his last name. He was working at Fletcher Moss Academy.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I know, because I'm his Facebook friend, I saw a picture of him of all these kids that were getting signed with Manchester United, and he was explaining to me how it all works.
Yeah.
And now he works at Manchester United.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see how it comes together. And that's one of the issues we have in the States, that because he was a volunteer, if you volunteer at a grassroots club, there's not a clear trajectory to academy as it is in the UK, where you can volunteer as a grassroots club, get your badges, and eventually get to academy, which then brings me to another point. Is there an incentive on the ground on the coaches, because they want their kids to be scouted and be successful, to, I'm going to use my air quotes, develop them? Or is it still that pressure to win in the short term? Yeah. And how do they think about that as it relates to being, quote unquote, scouted?
Yeah. So I would say 95% of coaches who I approach as a scout and say, hey, I really like Neil Crawford, your number 10. Tell me about him. They're delighted that a club is interested and they want to see him do well, just because they're good people and they want to see kids do well, but also they see it's good for their club. There's about 5% who are thinking, well, no, we don't want Neil to go to another club. We want to keep him in because we want to win the league this year, or we want to win the cup, or whatever it might be. So you do get a bit of that. You do get resistance, but it's not common. But you do get some who are absolutely focused on their team winning, which we all understand. We're all competitive, and some let that get in the way of development.
But do you have a lot that say, let me try to learn how Southampton, using this as an example, how Chelsea develops players, and let me try to prepare my players because I know that those are the attributes that you guys look for? Do you have that?
So I've been making arrangements today with one of our best soccer schools in the Southampton area for all of their coaches to come in and meet our coaches and to get training programs to help develop them as coaches and to help them get other qualifications and for them to see our standards. All part of building relationships with clubs, because we want them to be well. We want them to refer their players to us. So we try and look after them and help them develop, So those sorts of relationships happen. A lot of the good clubs will be getting good academies, will be getting the best local clubs in, working with their coaches, getting to know them, networking.
And that's interesting. We got to do I'm going to ping you again. We got to do another interview. So, and I actually wouldn't mind speaking to someone at the soccer school as well to learn about what it's like to be on the grounds of Grassroots.
Sure.
But now I'm going back to the Facebook group. We almost done. So Aaron, who's a Facebook member, asked, are there any technical tests or specific standards you require from an academy prospect? For example, do you look at abilities like completing 50 juggles or similar benchmark to assess a player's technical proficiency? And he's really talking about more of that unopposed technical work.
Yeah. No, there aren't specific tests. There are a number of apps that are circulating in the UK using artificial intelligence, which helps players get filmed and then they get timed on different things that they do. That's a growing market in itself. But no, there aren't specific benchmarks in that sense to skills. When players come in, if they're not the very young players, but the older ones, then one of the first things we will do when we're considering whether they're ready for a trial is to do some physical testing. And that's part of the decision-making process. How quick are they compared to the players we've got in the program? How strong are they? How agile are they? Not necessarily that we say we discount them if they weren't hitting that mark because they haven't been in a big program like ours, but we want to know. But that's physical testing, and that's tending to say 12, 13 upwards. But not technical, because the game is too varied for that. There are lots of players, and we've all seen them, Neil, who are wonderful at juggling the ball. Maybe they should be in a circus, because they're not necessarily good footballers. Not to say that that isn't a good thing to be able to do, but it's only a very little aspect of the game.
Yes, absolutely. So just to put this in a bow, you're not doing any unopposed technical benchmarks.
No.
But you're going to see them in their game environment. Do you ever attend a practice session?
Yep.
And so you'll see some stuff there as well, but you actually attend practice sessions as well?
Yeah. If I get targeted at a player, we're going to want to know everything about that player. And if he's playing local football, then I or one of my scouts will go and watch him in training, get that relationship, see how hard they work, see what they're like. And when I go to a game, I'm going to a game tomorrow, and my wife knows that I'll go early because I like to watch the warm-up. I want to see everything I can about the player that I'm going to watch, their attitude, how they speak to people, how they walk out onto the pitch to warm up even. I want to see them off the pitch. I want to know everything about them, because if we like them, we're going to invest in them for years.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask this one a little out of order, but it relates to that. Kimberly Powell asks, how important is a player's character and behavior off the field when you're evaluating them? Now, I know the standard answer is going to be it's important. You're investing in them, but try to give us a story of where this has gone wrong and something that parents can take away.
Okay, so at the younger ages, as I mentioned, you look for technique and physicality. As you get older, all the players in a top academy are all good players. They're all good athletes. They can all got good technique. What picks out the players who will go on and achieve when they're 15, 16, 17 is character. Example, Conor Gallagher, at Chelsea. He was not the best player technically at 15, 16. He had a lot of injury problems, growing pains and so on. Wasn't guaranteed to get kept on for his scholar years, as we call them, the 2 years. But what Conor always had was absolute 100% commitment. Every training session, every game, he had character. Then Conor goes on, drives on, captains Chelsea, plays for England, now playing at Atletico Madrid and doing really well, and has had a wonderful career, way beyond players who are 14, 15, might have been better than him technically. But he had that drive and that character. And that is the thing that really enabled him to make the most of everything that he had and bring it to bear. So character gets more and more important.
Give me an example of something that a player does extra that you've seen that they don't necessarily have to in an academy environment. So, like, how many days a week are they training, first of all?
Depends on their age, but let's say 14. So the players would train 3 nights a week. They probably come to us on one day, what we call day release from their school, where they do half a day schoolwork and half a day training, and then they play on a Sunday. So 3-4 times a week and play on a Sunday.
So if a player says, you know what, I want to work on ball striking with my non-dominant foot, is that something that you would just, you just come on an off day, you just see him out there, or is it something he would ask the staff that someone else may not?
Every player has, all of the top academies, has an individual plan. So they will have things like that they need to work on, and that will be built into their training program to do that individual work. But there are players who do extra. They might do extra running. They might do extra taking of free kicks, taking of corners. They might practice because they themselves are driven to want to be better. And so, of course, we notice that with players. Frank Lampard, great player. After every training session when Frank was young, and then right through his professional career, he would stay behind and do extra. Gianfranco Zola, one of the greatest players Chelsea had, the Italian, top of his career, wonderful career, still stayed behind after training to practice free kicks. So did David Beckham. There's no chance, it's no surprise that these were top players, because they had that attitude of always wanting to improve.
So, all right. So another Facebook group member asked, what are the top 5 attributes you look for in a player and where does speed weight rank among them? But I'm gonna shift that a little bit to say, is there a framework, that a standard framework that your scouts have that they need to, for all practical purposes, fill out? And if so, what does that look like?
Most clubs, most academies will work on what we call the four corner model, which you might be familiar with. So that's technique. Can they control the ball? Can they pass it? All of football is based on control, pass, and move. Simple game that we make complicated so that people like me can earn a living out of it. So it's technique, first of all. Can they control it? Can they pass? Can they shoot? Can they tackle? Can they head the ball? Technique. Physicality in this corner. Are they quick? Are they strong? Are they agile? Psychological. Do they want to win? Do they have character? Do they work off the ball? Tactical. Are they aware of other players when their team's got the ball and when the other team's got the ball? Do they see a pass? Do they make good decisions? So those four corners, most decision making and most sort of scout reports, one way or another, adapt that sort of approach for those four aspects of someone's game. And that's the structure that we actually use in our business to do our assessments as well, the four corner model.
So if you're trying to explain to someone that a kid is brilliant technically, and you have to explain it to them verbally, what would you say? Your scout calls you and says, Chris, this guy is magnificent technically, and he has to explain it to you verbally. Yep. What are some of the things he can say to you that lets you know, okay, yeah, he's technical?
I would say compared to who, first of all. So if he's a 14-year-old, let's stick with that example. I would say, well, look, who is he better than in our 14s? Who is he technically better than? Is he left foot, right foot? Can he use both? Can he beat someone? Can he pass? Whose shirt would he take in our team because he's better than them? So there's a standard of someone's ability, but it's only useful from a scouting point of view if you put it in a context compared to who. So if you say this is the best player I've ever seen, you say, really? Compared to who? Cool. Compared to Messi? He's the best I've ever seen? Well, at this age, really? So you have to have a comparison. And for us, most people in academies, you use your age group that player would be coming into. So the scouts have got to know that. Okay, they've got to know your own team and your own players. So that gives you a reference point. So that makes it useful then.
So the scouts are also watching your own training sessions.
Absolutely. You start with that. And we will, every scout who joins us, they're definitely keen to get out and find us the next great player. I say, we start with our team first of all. What age groups are you scouting? Okay, come and watch our training, watch our teams playing. We give them access to our huddle platform so they can watch all the videos of our teams, get to know our standard.
So, does the coach ever come to you and say, Chris, I need a left back?
Yeah.
And then what do you do?
I go and find one. So in our under 21s at the moment at Southampton, we need a left back because we sold the last one that we had in August for £10 million. Happy days. So we need a left back. So I say to my national scouting coordinator, Stills, go out and find us get your guys looking for left backs, this sort of age, this type of player. And so we begin to have a big push finding left backs. So even though as an academy we're judged by individual players progressing into the first team, you still want to balance your teams up. You want to have a range of players, different types of players and so on. And at the older ages, it might be quite specific about positions. In the younger ages, it might be in discussion with the coaches. I might say, look, you've not got many left-sided players, or you've not got many players who want to win the ball, or you've not got much pace or power, whatever it might be. So we might balance it up with different types of player at the younger ages, but later on, yeah, sure, it's a position.
So my younger son happens to be left-footed.
Yeah.
When you hear that, I'll use baseball. First base, batting, because it's few left batters. So you think first base, you think batting, that gives you an advantage. Pitching, it can give you an advantage. When you hear left-footed, what comes to mind is the stereotypical positions they would play?
Firstly, I'm interested straight away because there is still an imbalance, and you want that balance of left and right in the team. If someone is a right-footed centre back, I say, oh, okay, we've got quite a few of them. You tell me he's a left-footed centre back. Oh, okay, now I'm interested. What they like. This is before we know what they're like, because there is a shortage in most academies of left-footed players, and they give you that balance, even if they play inverted players or whatever. So there is going to be interest, and you're going to, yeah, sure. You'd initially think, well, left centre back, left wing back, left midfield. Then, of course, it gets more complicated now with inverted players, left-footed players playing on the right. But nevertheless, the principle is there. You want that range of players, that balance in a team. And most age groups, in most academies, there is an imbalance of left and right because there's more right-footed players. So you straight away, you phone me up as one of my scouts and say, Chris, I found a left back. Is he left-footed? Yeah, I'm interested.
Man, that's interesting. I'm gonna show my son this part of the interview. He's gonna be tickled. Okay. Hey, so all right. So now we almost done, Chris. We almost done. So Dev, I'm gonna read this one, but you already answered it. Kind of, what attributes or skill sets do you evaluate first? Actually, first when watching a youth player. So what's the first thing? What's the first qualifiers?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it does vary. But the first thing will be something that catches your eye. So is the player with a great touch. Usually it's simple things. Doing simple things really well is often an indicator of excellence. So it's someone who, when the ball comes to them, lays it off first time accurately and keeps the momentum of the game going. For example, that will catch my eye. But it might also equally be someone who loses the ball and then recovers really quickly, want to win it back, and they get that transition and they respond quickly to that. So there's a whole variety of things that might catch the eye. They're the first things that you see. I always say, Neil, we could sit together and watch a game and we find the best players and the worst players in 5 minutes. It's all of those players in between. They're the tricky ones who might be having a bad day, but actually a good player. They could be a good player if they did this better or whatever. So that takes a bit more time. But the eye-catching things are not necessarily the player who beats 4 players and hammers it in the top corner, although that's always lovely to see. But they might be the player who's really just got great positioning. And you see, they stepped in and won that ball again, and that might just catch your eye. And then you start watching that player in more detail.
Okay, so for American kids aiming to get scouted by European clubs, what is the best way to increase their visibility? And let me jump in and say that my older son plays part-time down in Charlotte Academy, and they recently sent a fellow from Greensboro, not too far from where we live, to Manchester, and apparently he's doing well. We'll see. Brilliant young player. So how does that happen? And let's talk about international scouting. How does that happen? And then how does an American player break into Europe?
The first thing is for them to get on the internet and do their research about FIFA rules. Every day I get people, parents and players, contact me from all around the world, want to come and play in England. And I say, have you done your research? Because FIFA do not want players to change countries. That's their starting point. They want American players to stay in the USA and develop in the USA and play their football there. That's the starting position. So if you're under 18, it's very difficult, unless you've got a UK passport, of course, which changes things. But let's presume it's just a USA passport. It is very difficult to come and play in England, okay? If you're over 18, it's still very difficult. You have to have it's called GBE points, a certain number of points, which is determined by the level of football you've played at, in order to qualify to get international clearance. Each club in the Premier League has 4 exceptions, 4 wild cards, if you like, that you can use each season to take a player who doesn't hit the standards. But most of those are going to be used by your first team. So for young players, you're not going to do it. It is very difficult for a USA passport player to come over and play in England. And they've got to be playing for USA probably to do it. And if they've got a UK passport, they can do it. If they've got a European passport, it's still no help, unfortunately, because we've left the European Union. So it's even harder. So it is very difficult to make that jump. We have a USA player at Southampton on loan. He's just going back to the USA, to New England, Noel Buck. And Noel had an English passport, even though he was an American player, playing in the MSL and what have you. So it's very difficult. So do the research.
So a player like him that was in Southampton, British player, British national, but American culturally. How did you find him?
Well, football is international now, and so we have our international department is done by our ownership group, Sport Republic, and they have scouts who are watching videos from all around the world, and play every day. I have agents from all around the world who are throwing players in at me, and we don't do much international scouting, as I say, it's done by the ownership group. So it's that it's the YouTube, access. We can see players from everywhere and all over the place, And so players get identified to us, and it might be parents. I get parents all the time send me clips of players, links to videos of players, and that can work. I can bring them. But for the international ones, I'm saying all the time, because I reply to every email I get, because that's the polite thing to do. That's how I was brought up. I say, you need to do your research. Your son isn't eligible to play in the UK unless he hits this standard, and so on and so forth. So, we're seeing a number of USA players making it in the Premier League and doing very well.
So it was almost done. So what if I said, I'm a U.S. citizen, I don't have a UK passport, but I'm going to go to school in the UK. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to do some. Are there ways of doing that and then getting on trial, or is it too complicated for you guys? And you're at your level, maybe a lower level club might. I don't know how it works.
If let's say a USA passport kid came over to school or college or university here, and their parents are still living in USA, the family hadn't moved. Okay, they might play local football. They might play for their university or their college or whatever. We can't sign them on that basis because they wouldn't get international clearance, because they're just here for education purposes. If the whole family moves for non-football reasons, mum or dad's job brings them to London, whatever, and then they start playing football locally at any age, then that can work, but you have to prove it's for non-football reasons.
Okay. So you kind of said this, but what are the main differences you see between youth players in England and the US? You said game intelligence was one big difference.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? Give me an example, a layman's person what does game intelligence look like?
At quite high levels in USA, college football to some extent, depending on the level of the college football, from my experience of assessing players, you will still see players, for example, midfielders, let's take that example, who are receiving the ball and not scanning. That means their first touch cannot automatically take the ball away from the opposition. This is just one example of one of the little tells, if you like, about game awareness. And that's because they've not been taught to do it and because they haven't practiced it. In a good academy in England, you will be being taught scanning at 11, 12 years of age. So you're looking all the time. So when the ball comes, we always say the top players, oh, wow, it looks like they've got radar or the eyes in the back of their head. Well, they haven't. They've looked. It's as simple as that. But that's a habit that you can learn. Check your shoulders, scanning. That enables your first touch to take the ball away from the opponent because you know where the opponent is. That's an example of game awareness, game intelligence that can be coached, not difficult to learn, but is less likely. Movement, straight line runs. Straight line runs are boring. As forwards, you watch college football. How many other straight line runs? I was taught, even though I got no coaching until I was 18, you do one run for the defender, take him with you, and then the next run for you move away from the defender. So you're moving in different directions. You're bending runs. That sort of variety of movement is game awareness, game intelligence.
Yeah. So Mr. Coaching License on YouTube University, Masters of Science on Google, what I tend to see when it comes to scanning a lot of times with players, especially midfielders, that's where my son plays. A lot of them, they'll be looking around. But what information are you taking?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I use the analogy. If my son is pretending to drive a car, he can be looking both ways, but are you taking in information?
Yeah.
So that's the next evolution of many of the youth players that I'm seeing. Oh, you see him in a one-on-one session? Ball. But what information are you taking in? Because when you receive the ball, you're not helping yourself. You're making life more difficult. And my son always says, because of the way his club trains and blah, 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 and he's kind of learned this. And again, he was born in England. He kind of says one of the challenges he has when he plays with other players is they're really good. They're really fast. They're really technical, but they're trying to go forward just a little too fast, not playing in the space and understanding the space. That's his assessment he has his own assessment of areas that he needs to work on. Yeah. The core strength is something that he's trying to work on now. The core strength is a big issue for him. So, but that was one of the things that he felt like his club does pretty well, and he can tell we're a little bit behind when he plays with kids who weren't in that club.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So we're almost done. So how important is free play in youth development? And do you see it contributing significantly to the technical and creative growth of players? And let me couch that by saying one of the criticisms we're getting with the modern game, 1 touch, 2 touch, move into space, pass and move, is we're losing creative players, those difference makers who can dribble, who can create something out of nothing, because they're not coming up in a free play street soccer culture and experience like you had.
Yeah.
Are we getting robotic players, and how are you guys thinking about it from a
we are getting, I agree, Neil. We are getting robotic players. When they're young, players 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, they need most of their coaching, their drills, they need to be 1v1s, 2v2s, 2v1s. They need to be emphasizing individual play, attack and defense, because that's another aspect of American players not getting regularly coached on how to defend in one-on-one situations. And that at the younger ages, there needs to be lots of that, lots of room for invention and lots of learning and lots of contact with the ball. And then as you progress, 13, 14, you begin to bring in team shape, and you begin to bring in tactical awareness of other players in a broader sense. But yeah, there needs to be a lot of free play. There needs to be that built in for players' creativity, attack and defense. And that comes by lots of 1v1 experience.
But are you seeing any relationships between, and I'm actually thinking about Reece James's sister, between the free play that they were doing in the backyard and the type of player they are versus the ones who are really in structured training environments? Are you actually seeing a difference of that? And let me say it like this. It's almost like interviewing people from different universities that have different cultures. Are you guys seeing a different, like this team, we know we're going to get this type of player. London boy, we know we're going to get this type of player.
Yeah.
Suburban kid, we know we're going to get this type of player. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah, definitely. So that generally around the country, kids from inner city areas, broadly, generally, are going to be more physical. They're going to be more competitive. They're going to have a bit of an edge to their game. That is why the inner city areas in London, South London in particular, produces more top quality players than anywhere else in the world.
Oh, wow. So the last 2 questions, I know you're tired, and I'm going to bring you back on in a couple of months, and we're going to do some work to get your video analysis company more exposure here, because it's a great service. Right. Last two questions. So Terrence McMorris asks, what are your goals for the next 5 years? I feel like you're on the interview. What are your goals for the next 5 years in scouting and soccer development? So let's talk about that in the context of the academy you're at, Southampton. How are you guys thinking about process improvement in terms of scouting?
we have a whole strategy which sets out our objectives and our KPIs, but broadly, it's aimed at producing better players that will make an impact ultimately in the first team at Southampton. That's the same at any club. But if your key recruitment age is the youngest ages, which makes sense, as we discussed before, 6, 7, 8, it's going to be 10 or 12 years before you see the benefit of that. You build for the future. You get them in. Let's say Reece James joined Chelsea at 7. So he'd make his first team debut to his 18, 19, so it's a long-term game, but we look to balance up, and that's what I'm looking to get: a better range of types of players, more pace, more power. That's what we've needed in our particular academy. So we're looking for that range. So yeah, we'll get into that. And we've got lots of specific targets and so on. And we are making progress, and then we measure it all though. That's the main thing. So for me, in 5 years, hopefully I'll be retiring then, and I can sit back and enjoy all these players that I work with and see them progress.
So in your final words of advice for aspiring players, their parents, or coaches on navigating the path of professional soccer, what would be your parting words to us?
Enjoy it. You've got to get something from the experience. The day-to-day, the enjoyment. If you get into a good club and you're getting good coaching and you're playing in good facilities with good players, enjoy the journey. Don't always focus on